I rise to speak on the Appropriation Parliament 2022-23 bill regarding the state budget that was handed down on the 3rd of May. And from the outset, I will just say that this budget completely misses the mark. This is a budget that completely misjudges the needs of our state and the economic environment Victorians are currently living in. It completely misunderstands the impact of lockdowns on business, on the economy, and on mental health at a time when Victorians desperately wanted to see a budget that invests in fixing that damage. Instead, we get more debt. Victoria already had a monstrous level of debt, and what we see with this budget is that debt continue to climb. The debt level of our state alone will soon be equal to that of New South Wales, Queensland and South Australia combined, with debt projected to reach $162 billion by 2025. We are talking about billions of dollars in interest alone that could have been instead invested into our communities, into our health system, into roads, into mental health. But instead, Victorians will be plagued by this enormous debt for many, many years, generational debt. So what do we get for all this debt? The government's PR made use of a big headline in the budget that read, "Putting patients first." The Andrews Labor government boasted about a $12 billion investment in healthcare to address the dismal state they have gotten our healthcare system into. When we break that $12 billion down, it becomes clear it is just more deceit. Of that $12 billion, $1.3 billion has already been spent on PPE and a COVID pathways program, which was jointly funded with the previous Liberal Morrison Commonwealth government. More than $1 billion has already been spent on RATs, which has also jointly funded by the Morrison government. A further $466.5 million has already been spent on COVID-19 transitional operating model, also jointly funded. And let's not forget the $257.9 million already spent on COVID-19 vaccinations, which was again jointly funded. So here we have the Andrews Labor government boasting about a $12 billion investment into healthcare. But what they failed to tell Victorians was that most of this funding had already been spent, and it was jointly met by the previous Morrison Liberal government. They have deceitfully included more than $3.5 billion in health funding that has already been spent last year. In fact, the Andrews Labor government have cut health funding by $2 billion. While hospitals are overrun and ambulances are ramped, this government has cut $2 billion from health funding. That's right. This couldn't have happened at a worse time. 21 Victorians have died waiting for an ambulance in the past 6 months. It is an absolute disgrace that the government still failed to address the issues with 000 and the healthcare system. These cuts have failed every Victorian. There was, however, one win for the Eastern Victoria region when it comes to health, with a commitment made for a new mental health, alcohol and other drugs emergency department hub at Latrobe Regional Hospital. This aims to free up space in the emergency department and shows that the government recognises that mental health, drugs and alcohol are a huge problem in the Latrobe Valley. It was, however, disappointing to see that the Latrobe Valley Magistrates Court was not prioritised to receive a dedicated drug court. I have previously spoken in this chamber about the importance of drug courts and the need in the Latrobe Valley given the positive outcomes these courts have achieved in Melbourne and Dandenong. Drug courts are now available in other regional communities such as Ballarat and Shepparton. I am perplexed as to why the Latrobe Valley is still not high on the government's priority list, given that they clearly recognise the high incidences of drug and alcohol use and offending in my region. There is also further mention of the Frankston Hospital upgrades, which I understand were first announced in September 2018, and completion is still not expected until 2026. This project was initially set to cost $562 million, but this year's budget revealed a total estimated expenditure of over $1 billion. The project has blown out to a disastrous $556 million. How does the government get it so wrong? I know from speaking to my constituents that there is a real and urgent need for upgrades at the Rosebud Hospital. The peninsula has the second highest oldest population in Victoria, with over 44% of residents being over the age of 50. The main buildings of Rosebud Hospital have not been comprehensively redeveloped or expanded in the last 25 years, and the two operating theatres cannot be used because they no longer meet Australian standards. My constituents on the Southern Peninsula are having to drive over 30 minutes to the Frankston Hospital for basic care, which is simply not good enough. The hospital is there, but due to underfunding, parts of it are just going to waste. These are services and rooms that could be used to save lives and complete life-changing procedures. If the government knew how to manage money, we could have had the Rosebud and Frankston hospitals upgraded and within budget. Instead, it is blown out by almost double. And the residents in Frankston and Rosebud continue to suffer. While we're on the topic of the peninsula, I have been vocal inside and outside the parliament on the need to save Flinders Pier at a time when the community was seeing and hearing nothing from their Labor member. It was therefore a pleasant surprise to see funding allocated for critical works on Flinders Pier as part of this year's budget. I won't speak to this at length because I've already done so in a recent member statement a few weeks ago. However, I would urge the government to get on with that project as soon as possible for the wider peninsula community. That brings me to roads. The government have cut a further $24 million from the Road Asset Management Program. That is after already slashing the program by $191 million in the previous year's state budget. As I travel across my electorate, it becomes clear that roads are simply not as good as they used to be. And it's just absolutely disgraceful, the state of our roads. Our country roads are riddled with potholes. Many are notorious for accidents that have taken lives. And this government's solution is to just lower the speed limit from 100 kilometres an hour to 80 kilometres an hour. They lower the speed limits instead of investing in overpasses or traffic lights, or whatever it is going to make those individual regional roads safer. The perfect example is at Tynong North, out the front of Gumbaya World. This is a notorious intersection that has taken many lives. Despite these tragedies, the government still fails to invest in that stretch of the road. They reduced the speed limit and gave themselves a pat on the back, while my constituents are left navigating this dangerous stretch of road each and every day. Another example of inaction on roads is Jetty Road down on the peninsula. The federal government provided $75 million in funding in 2019 for the Victorian government to use to complete much-needed upgrades at the intersection of the Mornington Peninsula Freeway and Jetty Road. That money has sat there for 3 years, and all the state government has done is use $3.5 million of that for a business case. Meanwhile, my constituents on the peninsula sit in congested traffic and have to navigate the dangerous intersection daily. The money is sitting there, and the Andrews Labor government continue to fail to act. They say they are acting, they say they are working on a business case. My constituents do not want a business case that wastes another year. They want action. This funding has sat there for over 3 years. I really feel for my constituents who have to navigate these dangerous roads while their state government take their time acting. Now, since the government first announced the expansion of the Angus Hospital in Upper Ferntree Gully in the 2019-20 state budget, the total estimated investment has blown out to $8.58 million. This is explained by a small line in this year's budget that puts it down as market conditions and COVID-19 impacts. That is a huge blowout and is only made worse by the fact that so many of my constituents cannot even use this hospital. I'm talking about the maternity ward, which has been closed since March due to a broken lift, which I have mentioned many times in this chamber and also spoke about it in the media. It is appalling that the government knew about this faulty lift for so long but failed to act. Now my constituents are paying the price by having to travel to Box Hill to give birth in an unknown environment, and this government can't even give me an answer on when this lift will be repaired. While my constituents navigate roads and hospital ward closures, they hear about how the government blows out by billions on its major projects. The state budget revealed a huge $4.7 billion blowout to the Westgate Tunnel project. It is quite sad that the tunnel was originally scheduled for completion in September this year, but that has now been pushed back years due to Labor's inability to manage money on time and its projects. Victorians are the ones meeting the cost. through the never-ending list of taxes that this government continued to impose. I think we're up to 42 new taxes from a Premier who once promised every single Victorian that he would not introduce any. Victorians deserve so much more than what this budget has delivered in Eastern Victoria region. Alone, we've seen a $69 billion blowout to the Seaford Stabling project and $11.8 billion blowout to the Frankston Station upgrade and a $5 million added to the bill of the Latrobe Valley Government Hub. And that's just to name a few. I've already mentioned many of the areas that have been forgotten, but business owners across the state have also been neglected. We know that local shopping strips have been left devastated by the extended lockdowns by the Andrews government. These business owners need practical support to recover and rebuild, but sadly, that too was overlooked by this budget. Instead, the Andrews Labor government are going to spend $14.8 million on trade programs, including an establishment of a trade and investment office in Paris. Is that really what Victorians want their money spent on? No, I don't think so. From the conversations I have had, this is definitely not what my constituents would have liked to have seen prioritised by the state. Overall, it is disappointing that the government have not prioritised Victoria's long-term economic recovery. Victorians deserved a budget that fixed the health system crisis, invested in mental health, created a strong economy and kept the cost of living down, and a budget that helped businesses get back on their feet. That is exactly what a Matthew Guy Liberals Nationals government will do if elected in November. Underneath the Andrews spin, it becomes clear the government have missed the mark in so many areas impacting the lives of those in Eastern Victoria and Victoria more broadly. I will continue to advocate for my constituents to get their needs heard.